I'm here with Crystal Toop. Crystal Toop of Blackbird Medicines is an Indigenous storyteller, author, and community educator. She is founder of collectives, a public speaker, and grassroots organizer, sought out for her lived expertise. Crystal shares insights as a generational residential school survivor and registered social service worker. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Oh, Chimigwech, thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, um, I I know of your work and I'm so inspired by your work, but for those listening, they probably don't know about your work. So let's dig in. Tell us what Blackbird Medicines is. What do you do?
Absolutely. Um, what I do is really, in my mind, it's really simple. It's just community helper, community caregiver. But I've had to package this work in a way that subsists my family and has that kind of long view look. Blackbird Medicines is my community practice, and it's really my kind of own solution to how I want to work in community. And so I started off doing a lot of frontline grassroots work, in Indigenous women support centers and things like that. And I've really been able to carry that peer-based sort of mentality in supporting people in the community. And for myself, that kind of crystallized and formed when I learned and trained as an Indigenous doula. And originally, I worked as a birth doula, and I was trained by the Native Youth Sexual Health Network. And they did a cool project with DONA International. And that training experience was really just like a catalyst thing for me. And I turned my attention to, yes, I'm a social service worker. Yes, I'm, the oldest girl in my family and all this kind of stuff. But really, it always comes back to like, I'm that doula, I'm that auntie, I'm that caregiver. And so that doula work has shifted over the years. Blackbird Medicines is an ever evolving thing. And really, I just do a lot of public speaking, educating, training. And we've gotten so much momentum working around end of life care. We have kind of I use the we, and I talk about the collectives that have helped me do this work as Blackbird Medicines,
Mm.
um, and really just been this kind of container that we support. The Indigenous Death Dual Collective is something that I was able to help found, and we've been so busy just supporting people in the reality of end of life care and caregivers supporting caregivers. That's kind of like my lofty, doesn't quite fit in a business plan paragraph description. But really, I help people design programs that better serve their community's safety needs. I work with families to come up with plans that include harm reduction and safety planning. A lot of families have a lot of different experiences, but in many different trending areas like displacement, like, loss of culture or separation or, on and on and on. So we do so much just like bridge building and, caring for people in a way that we like to think is a little pre-contact and in spirit. And yeah, so doula care, counseling hat, big sister, auntie type of Blackbird Medicines.
Mhm. All of it, all of it. And all of it is so important. I think what really drew me to the work that you do is this idea of decolonization around death and birth. Can you talk about what someone's experience might be if they were to contact you as your work in being a death doula? I think death and grief is so sanitized in the Western culture and so scary. And here you are creating humanity, creating connection, creating safety. creating compassion in this work. And that is something that I find in my work as a therapist is so unknown and uncertain with people. And so even talking about the idea of grief ritual or connecting to someone on their deathbed or in hospice is wildly just not normal, right? Like,
Absolutely. It's certainly been my experience. I turned towards death work in a way that made sense for me at the time as a professional and as a person in community and in my family. But, you really captured that piece, like nobody's talking about it. And then we
no.
have this colonized, sanitized, capitalized
Oh yeah.
way, this pendulum from birth to death is this squeaky clean, sterilized experience that really does separate people from the humanity of it all. And, uh, it's not, people say all the time, like, it's so hard to work in death. I can't imagine how you do that. But that's where, as someone with that um, lived experience, it's like life is death. It is. You know, there's a favorite quote I have from some movie, and it's just the line that a character says, but it's for those who fight for it, life has a flavor that the sheltered will never know.
Hmm.
And if you've ever had that survival experience in some form or another, you understand that fighting, upholding life is to walk in step with death. So
Hmm.
it's a
Hmm.
hard reality, but it is the reality. And that's where we have to soften and let those conversations happen.
Absolutely. I'm curious, and you can protect this as much as you want, but on I'm Human Too, we often talk about the story behind why we do what we do. And as you talk about lived experience and you talk about fighting for life, what is your experience with that?
Well, you can answer that question different every time it's asked, I think. But
Yep. Nope, we're not
cer-
looking for perfection.
um, you know, I have some of the more, I guess, hallmarky type of experiences like anyone else. I lost my first dog. I lost my grandma. I lost my grandpa. I lost, a kid I grew up with. And then there's those really, important losses that we all uh, have lived through and are very much, valid and real grief and life-changing experiences. Like, they certainly shaped me. And then there's also, as an Indigenous woman, there's a whole other layer of death and experiences where you weren't safe, where there was violence, where there was, trauma for yourself or others. And so there's that kind of scope. So I've personally, gone in and out of street life in my younger years, was criminalized, was, certainly marginalized in all of the intersections on
Mhm.
that sociological panoramic. Um, and having those, experiences in Canada where trying to navigate institutions and trying to advocate for yourself, having had experiences of violence and things like that, where you're trying to advocate for chronic pain and physical struggles and disabilities, and then hidden disabilities and visible disabilities and learning and education. And you just, all these different navigational experiences just intertwined into kind of this really big braided experience of um, certainly resilience and strength, but sometimes you can do everything right and you're still out of luck.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's the
absolutely.
hard part, yeah. So
Yeah. And I think you're naming something so important when we talk about the Indigenous experience is a level of hopelessness and a level of chronic and constant fight that we have to be in to be seen, to be heard, to be a human.
Yeah. And those collective and compounded experiences of grief are so um, just so epic and so essential to, like, it's just woven into our DNA. So it's, having opportunities where we can, share on grief literacy and touch on what grief looks like or what grief can feel like. It's been so restorative to do this work with that, just talking about addictions, how addictions impacts us and our families, or, you can switch to so many topics. Um, Climate justice, like all over the map, and there's so much to say, and there's so much richness, and there's so much of that death work to
Mhm,
be found. Yeah.
mhm. Often in my work with people, we'll talk about complicated grief and unresolved grief. And people will get really frustrated with me because I will hold them in that grief for quite some time and they want to be healed and they want to be better and they want to feel good. And I just let them know you're not going to get to the other side until we do this really tough grief work. How have you come through all of this grief? How are you still holding grief? What has your healing looked like? It sounds like you've been through so much, and yet you are here running an organization that is doing such important advocacy and community work. It's inspiring.
Chimiquach. Uh, I think the most difficult thing you can learn about grief is that it doesn't actually go away. It just changes.
Mhm.
And there are times where it changes back to another stage, and so
Yes.
you're
You're
like,
like, I
oh,
thought I was over it.
yeah,
No.
new level unlocked. And that can be really daunting. And yes, there's definitely healing work, but like so many cycle breakers can tell you, it doesn't end. It's ongoing. It's ongoing healing work. It's ongoing grief work. It's ongoing pursuit of healing. And the older I get and the more I work at this and myself and, try to be the best version of myself that I can be, the more I understand that it is about connection and it is about, we do very much try in my family. We've kind of radicalized is what we said. There was a point where with my children, I had them so young and they were young adults, or they are young adults now, and they still are teaching me so much about what the future generations need from us.
Mhm.
And it's I'm not done. I'm not done working on myself or on that healing work, but uh our ancestors managed to get through so much, and that really inspires me. I can't tell you how many times I look at that screen grab from the Reservoir Dog episode with
Hmm.
the ancestors at her back when she visits her auntie in prison.
Yes.
Every time it pops up in my feed or something, like it's just like I have to take a minute and just,
Mhm.
and we're made of such tough stuff, and
Mhm.
sometimes you don't really, that's the kind of, I hate to silver lining it, but I've gotten through some really rough things, and that helps me get through the other things. And
Mhm.
it's all informative, and it equips our battle armor for all that radical work and whatnot. Plus the connection, right? Like you make those connections, and you have people that want to help you do it. So that's the other thing is I don't do anything alone. So
Yeah, community and connection absolutely are so important. And I hear you. That connection to ancestors, like knowing that they are still with us, I often will ground in the fact that we go back 7 generations and we go forward 7 generations. And in order to continue moving forward in that generational healing, we have to go backwards and appreciate and connect and acknowledge. Um, so that's very powerful.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
and I really love to hold up that, it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of magic that you believe in. Uh,
Mm,
that's something that I was fortunate to receive in my intergenerational pass down, and that there is some magic out there. And for my most recent losses in my life, there has been important magical things that transpired around those losses that, yes, they were sad losses, but there's some magic to what happened around it. And even my grandfather, who passed last year, he, his wife, my grandmother, had passed 20 years before, and they'd been in love since they were like 14, kind of thing.
mm,
So it was a really difficult thing for him to live so long without her. And in that passing, we knew, we always had moon stories in our family, and my grandma always talked to us about her being up in the moon. And, there's some really good stories about the woman who fell in love with the moon. And my grandpa passed during an eclipse, a lunar eclipse. And
mm,
to us in the family, that was like, oh, that they're back together and they're very happy now. And that was so healing,
mm.
just to think of them and the moon, and that they're looking after all of this crazy family they made. So the magic that's there, it's like I'm gonna be that magic for whatever grandbabies or nieces or whoever are there, and it's gonna keep coming and keep going. And yeah, it's restorative.
Absolutely restorative, and it creates such a strong connection. Like the moon is something that isn't going anywhere. And to have that connection, to have even that imagery is beautiful. They're back together, especially with eclipse. It is that sacred time for grandmother and grandfather to be together. And that is magical and just reinforces this is something bigger than me. And it, to me, I hear like I don't have to break under that grief because I still have connection in a very spiritual way, in a very sacred way. And that's important. I think when we look to Western society, people often um, will either feel like it's finite and it's done and that connection is no longer tangible, or it's something that you're constantly having to strive to one day when you pass. We're looking through the Christian lens. So this idea of I can have constant present connection every time I look to the sky and I can pass that forward to my babies, to my grandbabies is beautiful. And so, like, my body calms as you talk about that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And the trends that I've seen in the past few years, of doing this work and supporting the work of the collective, and offering training to people, and in free counseling and grief supports and things like that. uh there has been such an interesting light that gets shone on the religious piece. And I really just identify as someone with spirituality. But it often comes up that this much of the community is Catholic or Christian, and this much of the community is traditional, or there's like a struggle there. Or maybe a community is entirely um, you know part of the Christian faith, and hesitant to welcome in any cultural learning or things like that. And it's just so different by each community. There's no way to pinpoint any one aspect, but we've had a training where there was a very mixed perspective and community.
Hmm.
And I remember there was one older woman who uh, was volunteer, and she talked about how being able to learn cultural perspectives helped her to better balance her own wellness as a Catholic. And, I she talked about, learning about traditions have removed the terror around death for me.
Mm, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot of religious trauma that we encounter at times, or systemic trauma that has, faith-based elements that, because they're part of systems, especially in Canada, there's so much church everywhere still. And I say that as a terribly practicing Catholic, if not really.
Well, we were
Uh,
all baptized Catholics, so you're not alone
uh,
in that.
Yeah, and I always loved church. I always loved the ritual and the beauty of the stained glass and candles and, reflection and things and different. And I've learned about a lot of religions and I've worked in faith-based organizations. Um, so I always respect that reverence and things like having those spiritual beliefs. But it's been an interesting learning this past year, especially doing so many more trainings because we're not in these kind of COVID protocols anymore.
Hmm.
Uh, how that's just top of the list every space we are in. It's something that comes up over and over and over again, and it gets to the point where it can derail at times. Um, but it's still such an important conversation that, we're all just so like feeling fortunate that we can at least have that safe space, regardless of whatever people's beliefs are. We can just say, well, we respect it and you're allowed to have your opinion, and people are having these conversations that are kind of like gritting your nails a little bit at times, but they leave as friends. And
Mm.
people are genuinely respecting each other, but also some of the traditional people have been so inspired in these discussions that they're going on after that workshop or that training, and they're collectively gathering and making sure they formalize and record all of their traditions and making sure they have those traditions to pass down to the younger generations. So it's so inspiring. All of it, all of this work is just like we joke that we're all kind of like a little bit morbid, a little bit Wednesday Addams, and uh, it's
That seems fitting, considering. Yeah, I can see that for sure.
but yeah, it's so I don't know. It's such a vast and interesting area of work, and there's just so much going on here, and there's so few people out here. If you have
There's
interests.
such a high need. Yeah, I was just in Vancouver at the Justices Trauma Conference. I was speaking out there, and um, it's incredible the yearning and the need for people to connect to the lived experience because I'm sure your story, my story is everyone's story. We're not unique in that, and it's rare that you can find community to hold all aspects of story. And I love what you're saying, where all of it needs to be held safely, all of it needs to be heard in a safe space. A, a big thing that I work on in my work is we call it ego state therapy, where it's part work, right? And all of us have different parts of self, and it's so healing when all parts of you can be held, whether we're looking at religion, whether we're looking at our Indigenous practice, whether we're working with folks of color, white bodies. All of it is important and all of it holds purpose and meaning. And when we can come to the table and actually hear one another and take up space in a safe way, that's when healing happens. I think we live in such a society that is so polarized and disjointed. It's incredible that you're creating this community space where white bodies and indigenous bodies can be at the same table talking about Catholicism and religious terror and death terror and also traditional practice. And in my own growth, a lot of my own healing has happened when I have been able to take up space and be heard authentically. And you very clearly understand and learn who can't hold you and who can. And so I love that work that you're doing. It's so important in the lens of collective healing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that you were speaking at that justice conference. I'm a longtime fan of Myrna's podcast and wanted so badly to go, and I hope to attend one eventually. Uh, but that whole, justice sector, oh,
Oh,
the
yeah.
grief work we could be doing there.
Oh,
Um,
it was a grief process. I can tell you that. Like everyone's stories were coming out. Very important work she's doing.
Absolutely. And, that's certainly a passion of like grief work as diversionary, support, care, preventative harm reduction. It's all so enmeshed. Yeah, healing work. I love it.
Yeah, especially as a collective, as a community. Here in the States, at least, and I know it's different in Canada, we are so polarized. And I can only speak to my experience here in the States in the Pacific Northwest, especially. It's very black and white. It's very you're either in or you're not in. There's a lot of gatekeeping that occurs, and rightly so. But that vulnerability that encourages healing, I'm just glad that there's more and more space for that. And that's what I really saw at the Justices Trauma Conferences. Everyone was ready to have open hearts and open minds and support one another and hear one another and connect and be helpers to one another because there was so many different communities present. And that was so powerful to witness. And even in your work, how diversified your work is, you're kind of fluid and you're transitionary. You go where the need is, which I think is very important as well. Because as we heal and as we grow and we hit different developmental stages, the need changes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm. Hmm.
Especially in a lifetime, you know, that's what's been so amazing to be able to offer trainings. The online training itself is really just kind of this baseline of thought to get people, moving towards. And, it's great. And they're having conversations, they're coming to, the death cafes and grief supports, and they're talking about things. Um, and they're having conversations for the first time in their households, and at work, at lunch break, and different things like that. And it is so cathartic, and it's easy to see over and over again how that becomes so. But when we start to take on this work as, I mean, I guess in a way it is some community leadership. We
Yes.
know, we all know these people who, oh, so and so's gonna drive her to her, she's got surgery, she can't drive herself home, she's gonna pick her up. And then, she's going over to that person's house and she's watching their kids, or, we all know these caregivers and we all see them uh, just care and care and care. And I've seen it where I've been able, within my own family, like I've been able to nurture that in my younger nephews and things where they are witnessing care. And I've
Mm.
watched them turn around and witness care to the younger ones and to the animals and, things like that. And it's so fantastic. But when we have this normalized in our homes, uh, the different workshops and the opportunities we get to meet with people, um, it's normalizing harm reduction for people who have had so much other negative things normalized.
Hmm.
I'll use an example from my family where it is like the go-to idea to call child protection on each other.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
really not for good reasons, not for children being in danger, but because it's a weapon.
Yeah.
And, these are really unhealthy first reactions to have in scenarios. I don't know if, I mean, it's not obvious to everybody, but
Yeah.
these are things that we have to, offer those examples and let people talk about them and reflect on them. Because if
Mm-hmm.
nobody ever mentions it, nobody's ever going to change the way they think. They're just going to keep following along. And that's what we do when we role model behaviors and, things that we took in because somebody went to residential school or things that were taken in because someone was not loved in a group home. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
there's so many small things, and that's that's been such a big piece of um, renewed grief that people take on in
Mm-hmm.
training and learning workshops and things like that. Um, so it's that ongoing healing work that, yes, you're working in grief and yes, you're building connection, but you're still having to make sure that you take those moments to care for yourself. And so yeah, creating those workshop safety spaces, it's just kind of these really good reminders we all need as well. Um, you know, we all want to be cycle breakers and be the best versions of ourselves and things like that. But sometimes you just get your perspective like sideswiped and you got to take a minute.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's very, what you're describing is very real. Um, and we do what we know. We do what we were taught. And, for I think for me, it got to a point where I realized this is not enough. I need more. And I worked very hard at rebuilding relationship. And that's what you're describing is modeling a healthy, safe relationship rather than extending violence or shut off or disconnection, which is very important. And it can also lead to caregiver fatigue. I am very much a caretaker in my family as well, and that can definitely lead to some resentment or exhaustion by having to say the same thing to siblings or to parents, because it is this very clear switch when your parents are no longer the parents when you're parenting. And that's difficult. And it is important to have the support and even the accountability of someone saying, like, step away, take a breath, take a break, go take care of yourself so that you can come back and continue doing that important work. Because it does trickle down to different generations, what am I saying? The smaller generations, the littles. And yeah, I see that in my nieces and my nephews, how they've learned to caretake for grandparents, for aunties and uncles. And there's a very clear um, modeling that either happens or doesn't happen. So, and virtual learning is wonderful, I imagine, because you can go further and farther, which like is so important. We need it everywhere.
Well, it's been definitely fun. Originally, the training was designed online out of necessity with the pandemic. We wanted to be able to make it accessible to everyone who wanted to get involved and, offer that kind of lens in their community and their families. But also recognizing not everyone has great internet service, not everyone has a laptop. Trying to just be as accessible and inclusive as we could. And now we have some really tinny sounding Zoom recording interviews and things like that we have to circle back on. And, thankfully we have the opportunity to, travel when we can and to visit with people and talk again and get some of those stories. But it was so essential, and it's been essential to just get people to start thinking about it, and start making it part of what they know and think about.
Mhm.
Um, One of the most important pieces that the training has kind of close to the beginning is about menopause and how that
Yes,
is a
please.
transition, right?
Yes. Yes, please.
Uh, and having all of these transitions that can cause so much grief. Even positive transitions can cause grief.
Mhm.
I, I was really fortunate. Right before the pandemic, I met my partner, and we we hurried up and got married during the pandemic, so we didn't have to have a big wedding. And
I also was a 2020 marriage, so it was like no one can come. Great, let's do it.
I know it's like we'll get some hummus, we'll be good.
Yep.
Uh, so we got married in the backyard, and
Incredible.
and again, like I have these much older children, and there was a time in that whole transition where I really grieved that my children didn't, I didn't meet this partner sooner, that they
Mm,
didn't have the benefit of having, this partner as a parent from a younger age. And
yes.
it was such a strange thing to feel so much grief over almost, it was almost like a non-thing, but it was
Hmm.
a thing.
Oh yeah, a big thing,
A
right? You're
big
like
thing.
grieving the life you could have had.
Grieving the life you could have had, but also grieving the reality
Mm,
as well.
hmm.
And there were so many complex things, and over time in many of the discussions and learnings we have, it's some like someone can grieve, you know, the experience of becoming a grandparent. They're not sad about becoming a grandparent. They're not sad about the baby. They're thrilled about the baby, but they're sad that their child is no longer a child. Their child is now, a father. And
Hmm.
it's not a sad thing, but it is like you grieve that little person. Um,
Yes.
and it's a stage you're grieving.
Mm,
It's the time of the passage of time.
yeah. Yes.
uh,
Which we can't stop and we don't have control over.
I mean, Fleetwood Mac wrote a few songs about it. Those tend to help.
Yeah.
Um,
On a bad
but
day, I'm
you know,
blasting. Yes.
you have definitely these moments where it does, it occupies a space in your heart and space in your mind, and it can feel a little heavy on your shoulders. And those kinds of moments of grief are equally important that we learn about and discuss, because the more grief literacy and grief literate we are, I think it just really does restore uh, what we had pre-contact.
Hmm.
I think it's something so elemental
Hmm.
that we were denied in all of the things that have unfolded and continue to unfold. If your loved one is experiencing, the opioid epidemic personally, or if your loved one has gone missing, like these are not things that have, nice, you know, conclusions to. There's no ribbon to put on a box. It's not easy to get closure.
Hmm.
And having that grief literacy um, can at least help people find healthier ways to, or at least that healthier way is just feeling comfortable to talk about it, I think.
Yeah. Creating compassionate space, normalizing it, knowing that you're not alone in it. People grieve so silently, and they've been taught to grieve silently or separately. And so that grief literacy is hugely important, and definitely ceremonial when done in community, safe community. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, where can we find you? What's coming up for you?
Oh my gosh.
Like, tell me all the things. I want to be there.
Well, we're coming to we just started working on our final year of a grant we have with the Ontario Trillium Foundation that's really supported the whole vision of our collective. They really just gave us some resources to make things happen.
Awesome.
So we're wrapping up this big 4-year grant. We're on year 4, and we're having a healing gathering in June. So
Nice.
bringing all of these helpers and caregivers together and saying, hey, let's manage this caregiver burnout before it comes burnout. Let's give you a minute on the land to take care of yourself.
Lovely. Lovely. Needed.
So that's the big thing I'm really excited about. It feels like it's happening tomorrow and I'm not ready. Um,
Slow down. You have a couple more months.
it's but it's going to be so amazing. There's going to be in-person workshops, things that are really relevant to people who are drawn to helping as it relates to death and dying.
Mm,
And then we're working on a train the trainer model for the Indigenous Death Doula training program. We're also working on a new name because doula is fantastic, but there's also some not so great associations with it.
yes.
And, we want to stay culturally relevant. And so it might end up being something around the helper name, but we're going to be taking that one to the elders at our gathering in June and see
Awesome.
what comes up.
Good.
But yeah, doing a train the trainer model so that we can support people to come up with solutions in their own community. Um,
Wonderful. Wonderful. Empowering the people. Yes.
exactly. I can only recommend so much.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
live in my little bubble here. I don't know what somebody around the world needs, and that's the beautiful thing is people around the world are interested, and Indigenous people around the world are taking this course. So it's been, oh my gosh, just
It's
all
so
the words.
exciting.
It's been, I
Yeah.
mean, it connected me with you. Like
Hmm.
I'm living my best life. It's great.
That's awesome. Well, and I think you approach it with humility. Like that's what drew me to you is you have such a humility and such a connection to the actual need. I always say, to people, you're the expert in your own care. I'm here just to support. And I think when you're approaching it from a very human, very authentic space, good things happen. And yeah, the people that can hold you will. So I am so excited to hear more. I saw that training the trainer, so I'm gonna go back to that and look at that. So
It's not
uh,
out yet. We have just the regular, training for folks, but yeah,
mhm.
train the trainer is hopefully going to be epic.
I bet it will be. I bet it will be. So thank you, thank you. Where can people find you? I can say it all, but I'm probably gonna fuck it up. So
Um, okay, so I'm on Instagram. We have Blackbird underscore medicines on Instagram. I'm on there as well. If you find Blackbirds, you'll find me. And then we have a Facebook page, Blackbird Medicines, same thing, underscore in the middle there. Um, yeah, we're not really, that's pretty much it. We
awesome,
keep it
awesome.
simple.
We'll tag you, we'll link, we'll do all the things. Um, I am so grateful that you were here today in presence and just sharing space, sharing your passion, your vision, your magic. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you to everyone for listening today. Tune in. We drop every Wednesday, new episode. So look for this episode on YouTube as well. Thank you.